Welcome into Overtime here on this Wednesday night. I'm Gerhard Mathangani, joined once again by Mark Everett Kelly. Had him on Monday to recap the first two rounds of the NCAA Tournament. We now also have him tonight with a Sweet 16 preview. Had John in last night, got some of his thoughts about what he thought about both Alabama and the NCAA Tournament at large. We'll do the same thing with Mark. We'll also dive into some Jacksonville State football, also some big news out of the entertainment world as it relates to sports. We'll also fill you in on baseball and softball as well. Mark, once again, welcome in. Good to see you for the second time here this week, and great to see no tornadoes this Wednesday as opposed.
It's a little bit weird for a New Yorker to come down here and people say, oh, it's the tornadoes. The what?
Exactly, yeah.
You know,
right.
Hurricane, I know. I know maybe typhoon,
right.
But tornadoes, that's a little bit of a stretch for this Long Island boy.
Welcome to spring in Alabama, and hopefully, cross our fingers, that tomorrow will also be as good as last week was, especially here in the East Alabama area. But of course, we cross our fingers for everybody out there around the state of Alabama, bracing for the bracing for the severe storms coming up tomorrow. Meanwhile, coming up this weekend, we'll have Alabama over in the bubble in Indianapolis, Indiana, playing in the Sweet 16. Of course, this is a big time for the Crimson Tide. Another big game coming up after knocking off Maryland in the Elite Eight. We talked about that on Monday. Now we preview the Sweet 16. Now, where do you see this Alabama team, and what are some of your general thoughts on the Crimson Tide as they spend one more week in the bubble as they face UCLA this weekend?
I think the thing I enjoyed seeing the most is after they struggled a little bit in the first half against Iona, and they figured out maybe we got to push the pace a little bit more, make this team play more our style, which was effective all year. You look at how they played, they forced their will on people, especially defensively. They were able to continue to do that against Iona, and then the game opened up for them more and more in the second half. Against Maryland, I loved that matchup for them.
Yes.
And you saw just by the way that they were executing, by how they hit their shots. They shot over 50% in the first half and the second half. They made 15 threes. They just came alive again. You saw John Petty. It was like the rapture. He was like being reborn when he hit that three. Finally, that skid broke, and then like 5 seconds later, he hits another three. And I think that set the team off a little bit too, because he's pretty much their leader. This is the guy that they depend on. This is the senior. This is the guy that makes big shots. And it was kind of like, hey, I'm back, guys. Let's go and take off with this thing. I also love their matchup against UCLA. But again, Maryland and UCLA, those are two teams that are more they're not going to play tricks. They're just going to come out and play. And the matchups really favor Alabama. And you could see the way that they just torched Maryland in the second round. A little bit different than what Pitino did, where he wanted to slow the ball down, make them force into their game. Maryland was willing to come out and play normal, and Alabama has the athletes. They got the shooting, they have the discipline, and their defense continues to make the difference.
I'll ask you this then. I asked John this yesterday, and pick your brain on your opinion of this. Do you think this was the game that Alabama needed in order to kind of put the rest of the NCAA tournament teams on notice? Noticing just how, people kind of knew Alabama was good, but I think personally they needed a big time performance to really prove it in this tournament. Do you think that that performance did? Do you think they can do even more? What are some of your thoughts on the main thought that the Maryland game was one that was good, but they could take it a step further?
Well, I don't think they needed to prove anybody to anybody. I think they proved to the SEC how they did. They won the regular season. They dominated the regular season. You look at a team that played the other night, LSU. They dominated them 2 of the 3 matchups, and I honestly thought that they were going to get a chance to play them again. So I don't think they had to prove anything to anybody. You knew what they did well. You knew the type of style that they wanted to play, and you also knew another thing about them that you found out in the SEC tournament and in the first game is that they don't have to be playing their best to win. And that, to me, is probably the scariest thing if I'm an opponent looking at them saying, you know what, when they are really going on full tilt, they are super dangerous. But even when they're not, they can still beat us because of how they defend, how they pretty much rely on each other to break down the offense. And they'll figure it out if they're not doing something well. Even on nights they're not shooting the ball well. But on nights that they're shooting the ball well, it is very, very hard to beat this team.
Exactly. According to Ken Palm, they're the number 8 team in the country. They walk into this matchup with a 26-6 record. Now, I know a lot of people can kind of get a little mind-boggling as far as the
Shots.
advanced statistics go and the advanced analytics go. Nate Oates is a huge proponent of the advanced analytics. But here's some easy ones to digest. Alabama ranks number 28 in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency. What that essentially means is that per 100 possessions, they score about 112 points.
Which is unbelievably
Which is
good.
great, exactly. Even better, though, is their defensive side. They're number 3 in adjusted defensive efficiency. Per 100 possessions, they only allow or give up 87.3 points per game. As far as tempo goes, they're number 12 in the country with just over 73 possessions per 40 minutes on the table. I think that the stats in this one really kind of bode well. We'll get into UCLA's in a bit, but I think the way that the measurements go for Alabama, they bode really well, not only all year long, but in this tournament.
They do. Look, going into this bracket, the East region, I wasn't scared of Michigan. I thought they match up well with Michigan. I think they match up well, even if they would have played Texas, which they didn't have to, thanks to Abilene Christian. I think they would have matched up well with them. UCLA, you look at the fact that they just don't have the athletes or the type of scoring in order to give them problems, or the small guards that might can penetrate.
Right.
A team that really would bother me would be Florida State. They're the one I'm looking at. They have size, and they defend. And they also can shoot the three pretty well, too. So they do everything Alabama does, except their size, the size quotient is really how you can beat Alabama.
Right.
That's why I was a little scared of if Michigan State would be in this position tonight.
Right.
Instead of UCLA, they would be a tougher out because they play very physical. They're going to, pound the boards, and that's the one area I think maybe Alabama is a little bit susceptible.
Exactly. One of the great things you do as a former researcher for ESPN, you've worked this tournament so many different times, so many different years. You dive deep into the numbers. So let's do that. Some of the things that you've kind of broken down with this Crimson Tide team first overall. We'll talk about one of the things that you noticed is the way they played in the first half against Iona as compared to the way they've played over the next 3 halves. It has been a tale of, I won't say 2 different halves, it's been a tale of 1 half versus the other 3, and obviously Bama's obviously just gotten way up, kind of more toward their numbers what they did in the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The first half was the worst of times.
Charles Dickens?
Yeah, it was, Charles Dickens, the Ultra City. But you saw they were a little bit hesitant, maybe. Welcome to the NCAA Tournament, guys, okay? Time to play. They didn't, even Petty, watching Petty, I mean, he couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat in that first half. Right. But he was also doing things he normally wouldn't do, trying to post up, take shots you're not used to seeing him take. And I think overall the team in the first half against Iona was a little tight, and you saw that. You look at the field goal percentages, 12 for 29, the turnovers with 10. For the rest of the other 3 halves, they've only had 14 total.
Right, yeah.
So it almost equaled that total in 1 half compared to the other 3.
60 minutes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that just shows you that they've calmed down and are able to execute their offense. All the things you saw them do all year in the SEC, which is why they won the regular season title. Most people didn't think they were good enough to advance this quickly. But you look at what they do well, how they use their size to their advantage, how they use their speed to their advantage, and most importantly, their feet moving defensively, and they force other teams to making mistakes and bad shots. So even when they're not shooting the ball well, which the last 3 halves, from 20% in three-point range to almost 50% for three-point range, just night and day, and then shooting over 50% from the field overall, and the ability to force turnovers, to not turn the ball over, and their bench has also been a big help to them.
And that's exactly where we're going next is the Alabama bench. They're really not only getting scoring out of their main 5, but they can dip into their bench and be able to still keep up with different teams. Herbert Jones, the SEC Player of the Year, doesn't even have to have a good game. He didn't even have a good game against Maryland, and it doesn't matter because the guys coming off the bench are doing a great job.
Yep, and the offensive rebound, him and Gary, really, Gary's a big physical player.
Right.
He's a strong kid. I love that guy, and he brings effort. It's just sheer will, offensive rebounding, and you can tell this guy comes to play. Herbert Jones, he does everything well, and he kind of took it. I don't want to say took a game off. He didn't take a game off, but his numbers aren't what you would normally see from Jones, which is like maybe 12 points, 6 assists, 7 rebounds, 4 on the offensive side, rebounds, 3 turnovers, a couple steals, maybe through 2 or 3 blocks. but he does everything really well. He didn't have to do that against Maryland because they were hitting their shots. But when you're plus 45 from the other bench in those 2 games, that is absolutely huge. It just shows you that Alabama can throw a number of different things at you. And when one guy isn't shooting well, they got a number of guys. They got Keon Ellis. They got Quinterly. They got even Miles. I've seen Miles. I remember that dunk Miles had during the regular season, which was awesome. So they have a number of ways to beat you.
Exactly. One of the guys you mentioned earlier, John Petty, who turned everything around really in the Maryland game, and he couldn't miss for a very long time. We'll take a look at some of those highlights, but he's also one that I think did 2 things. He caught fire, and then what that ended up doing for the team was, I think that the energy kind of rolled over his team. So number one, it was tangible. He was able to get the scoring going, but then secondly, I think he was able to motivate his squad, and some of the stats bear that out as well.
Just that shot right there. That shot doesn't go down. In the first half against Iona.
Exactly. Didn't seem like he could buy a basket then.
No, it didn't. And then he's not only that, turning the ball over. Too. Things he did, and missing free throws, things he didn't normally do. Alabama too. The first half missing free throws against Iona. That game they missed like what 10?
Exactly.
And they normally don't do that. Since then they've been great from the foul line, but they looked to him. He is their emotional leader, and you saw like just the happiness in his face when he started to hit those shots, and everybody else on the team was like, "Yes, we have our leader back. Let's go. Let's finish what we started here." Now we're ready.
And let's break down Petty by the numbers here. In round 2, he was incredible as compared to the previous 9 games. That's a good sample size. 9 games for one of your leaders, for one of your stars, and he's really turned it on there in the second round versus Maryland.
And then what I had shown before that going into the game against Maryland is you had the first half of the season where he performed like he did in the second round, where he was making shots consistently, especially from 3-point range, and his point per game total was much higher on like the 14s and 15s. It wasn't below 10 like it was the previous 9 games. But another thing, look at the free throw percentage, no 20-point games, and just awful from the field and overall from 3-point range. Much better now, and I think he's going to be a key factor in their game in the Sweet 16.
I think he'll definitely be one to watch out for after that 20-point performance the other day, and we'll see how Mr. Petty does, the team leader and the guy who I think who's kind of made a name for himself for Alabama fans, but also I think he made a name for himself as it relates to the next level.
National name.
Exactly. Last thing we'll look at with Alabama is teams that are facing double-digit seeds for the 3rd consecutive game. This is an interesting thing that you actually not stumbled upon. You looked up and you were able to find. This is a really, really strong. You look at the results. It bodes well for Alabama as they move forward. Just that one loss back in 2014 with number 2 Stanford.
Yeah, I think that it worked out to their advantage that they get, you only can beat the teams you play. So people say, oh, they're not playing tough teams, so they're playing those guys that think they know more than anything. They beat the teams they have to beat. And the matchup against UCLA to me is much better than the matchup would be against Texas. Okay? It doesn't mean that they can't lose. It just means that I think that probably for them this works out the best. Again, where I really fear is that game against Florida State. I would be relieved if, being an Alabama fan, I'm really not, but, for just the sake of doing this show, let's say that I don't have a bias, okay? I would much rather see them play Michigan than see them play Florida State. I just don't like the matchup against Florida State. And I would love to see them get Gonzaga, which they would get in the Final Four if all things stay the same. So we'll see. I think they'll really have an easy time here against UCLA. I'll be shocked if they lose. But these other teams, okay, most of them took advantage. The only one who didn't was Dayton. And if you look at, just even getting to the Final Four, that's going to be a big advantage for Alabama.
Exactly.
Something they've never done before. Which is another guy should have done that most wins without getting to a Final Four.
Right.
Alabama has the most right now.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And we touched on that before the tournament, and now you're right. They have eclipsed that without going to the Final Four. They could change it all this year. In order to do so, they'll have to stay in the bubble. And head coach Nate Oates talked about the bubble. It's obviously very different. They're not coming back home between weekends. They're staying in Indianapolis, and obviously it's been very different for the Crimson Tide.
I told the guys, most mentally tough team may come out of this thing, so we're going to get out. I got out and enjoyed the outdoors a little bit today. Man, before today, I'd been here a week. I'd been outside one time, outside of getting on a bus and getting off. So we had a couple of the guys go out. Maybe we'll make it mandatory. Maybe we'll get a little softball game going. I don't know, something. They let us go over to Victory Field. That's nice. I'll tell you what, the food's been great. The first day was a little struggle. After that, it's been good. Our nutritionist, Amanda, has been great supplementing but the hotel food's been good, and the meals we got there, and then she supplements it with some snacks and some other meals. And I put on like 10 pounds since I've been in the bubble, so I need to hurry up and get out of the bubble. Hopefully it's a couple more weeks, but I might need to start disciplining myself with the eating in the bubble and get a little bit more exercise, one of the two.
Let's talk UCLA now, and the Bruins are one of the teams that I think has been one of the more impressive teams now going into the Sweet 16 matchup. From a Ken Palm standpoint, they rank number 24 in the country. They have a 20-9 record as they walk into this matchup. They're number 12 in the adjusted offensive efficiency. So that's actually better than Alabama by a couple of strokes. They 116 points per 100 possessions. However, they do give up a lot of points as well. Number 63 in adjusted defensive efficiency, allowing 95.8 points. So I think the Alabama offense versus the UCLA defense will be an interesting matchup in this one. Also, tempo. They're not as fast as Alabama is. Alabama is the top 15 team in tempo. Meanwhile, for tempo for UCLA, 337th. Averaging 61.4 possessions per 40 minutes. So I think the game plan for UCLA would kind of be to slow it down a little bit like Iona did. What's your thought about the Bruins coming into this matchup?
Yeah, I think if they try to go out there and run with them, Alabama just can blitz them and score at will. And you don't want Alabama playing their style of game, which is getting out in the open court, allowing their bench to have the effect that it did before, playing 12, or not 12, but 8 or 9 deep, okay? Yeah. But usually they can match up as far as numbers. They do have 5 guys in double digits in scoring. So that's where really their offense comes from. They can score, and they are diverse.
Exactly.
Johnny Juzang is kind of like a Petty type where he's physical, he can get to the basket, and he can also shoot the 3. But they don't have enough guys that can penetrate, dish, and they don't have a Herbert Jones, which to me is the ultimate factor in why Alabama will win. And also the way that Alabama defends, they will absolutely break the will of UCLA about halfway through this game.
You had an interesting graphic for the Alabama side as far as facing a double-digit seed for the 3rd straight game. Meanwhile, another wrinkle we'll look at here with UCLA, teams with already 3 wins in this tournament. Of course, UCLA had to play the aforementioned Michigan State going into the first 4. I still call it the play-in game. So you had the first 4 matchup. They've won 2 since. So you think a team might be hot. However, historically speaking, this is kind of like the end of the road for a lot of those teams outside of the VCU team coached by Shaka Smart back in 2011.
Yeah, little boys to men right there.
That's right.
End of the road. No, VCU was the only one to get past us into the Final Four. And again, that was something that most people didn't think was going to happen. An 11 seed getting to the Final Four. High seeds normally don't have that type of run. They're probably dealing with more as far as being, maybe not being tired because there's enough space between the games now. I mean, like Sunday is the next game. We're talking almost a week. So, but I think UCLA had, just in playing that first 4 games, nobody thought they were going to beat Michigan. So they're kind of playing with, hey, we got nothing to lose. That is a little bit dangerous until you come against the big boy here.
Right.
And, Alabama is a lot different than the teams that they've played in the first 2 rounds. They're a lot more physical than BYU, and they can shoot the ball better and do a lot of things that, Abilene Christian, they were a 14 seed. Most people didn't think they had any chance against UCLA anyway.
Right.
So UCLA got an advantage there. They probably wouldn't have survived against Texas. So now you get to see. When I was a kid, I was a UCLA fan. I loved John Wooden, so I'm kind of torn here. And then some of the memories of the past of UCLA when they had Ben Howland. So I feel for the UCLA fans, but if you're Alabama, you have I think you could have a very fun day on Sunday, assuming that defensively they are just so strong. And when you play that type of defense, you really break the other team's will because they know every time down the court they're going to be exhausted just trying to get off a shot.
Exactly. Should be a great one on this weekend as Alabama and UCLA tip off on Sunday night. Meanwhile, Alabama and Maryland, not just on the men's side of the bracket, but also on the women's side of the bracket. However, unfortunately, it was the end of the road for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Maryland, the number 2 seed, on a 14-game winning streak, and they extended it to 15 games. They really jumped out quickly on Alabama and ended up winning that game 100-64. Of course, Maryland was the heavy favorite. Very few expected Alabama to even be here. However, Alabama did something they hadn't done in 22 years. They won a tournament game. Christy Curry has this team kind of believing in themselves once again. So despite the ugly loss today to a team that is going to be contending for a national championship, I think Alabama's got a lot to be proud of with their women's program.
I mean, they do. Look, much like the men's program, not much was expected out of these girls this year. Okay, they came out, they played. I thought they played as best as they can. They set now the precedent for what to expect next year, that there are healthy expectations to have for this program.
Right.
The days of just kind of existing in the SEC as just another women's basketball team are over. Right. Now the line's kind of been drawn. Okay, guys, we made the tournament. Let's build on it, and let's see if we can get and take some inspiration from our boys and seeing what they've been able to do.
Exactly, and both turned their program around, and we'll look to see Alabama coming up in the near future back in the NCAA tournament. They have a really bright future ahead with head coach Christy Curry. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll talk more of the NCAA tournament. We'll go a little bit further out, get Mark's opinions and thoughts about who he thinks will come out of the region by the end of this weekend. Join us for that next. We're back here on Overtime on WOTM. We extend our talk of the NCAA tournament to the broader field, not just Alabama. And Mark, as we talked last time on Monday, there were still some games still left to be played, but now everything is now settled and the dust is now settled, and we now have the clear picture of what this tournament looks like by conference. And one of the things that we all got talked into at the beginning of this tournament was how great the Big Ten was and how excellent the Big Ten was and how it was the deepest conference all year long. Well, here we stand at the second weekend. There's only one Big Ten team alive. Talk about the breakdown of the conferences here as you see it.
Well, I think two things happen when you have a lot of teams in a tournament from one conference. You saw the Big East had the record before. They had 11 teams in 1 year. But they all beat each other up during the regular season.
Right.
Then they create they get used to this type of style they play. Somebody comes in playing a little differently. They force you to do things that you haven't done all year, and you're susceptible to a loss. That's what makes the NCAA tournament so great, is because it's based on one game. And you could have a bad game that game, and everything you accomplished during the regular season was right out the window.
Exactly.
So it breaks your heart if you're a fan, but that's part of the love of the NCAA tournament. That's why people are ripping up their brackets everywhere. Ohio State fans are a little annoyed, but hey, Ohio State beat St. John's in 1999, something I still haven't gotten over, so I don't feel bad for them. And other teams too. Illinois, the #1 seed, losing.
Right.
It kind of goes back to when they lost against North Carolina in 2005 and blew that huge lead when they were expected to win the NCAA tournament back then. So sometimes things happen as a conference, as a team, that you can't prepare for, that you don't see happening, but they do. And you just got to roll with the punches, as they say.
Let's take a look at the breakdown of the conferences. The Big Ten came in with those 9 teams, and then they walked out. They're now 1-5 with the one team left. As well as the Big 12. Michigan, they also had, they had 7 teams coming in. They also have just one team out. 2 teams out of the SEC, 2 of the better teams that ended the season with both Alabama and Arkansas still alive. And how about the Pac-12? Probably more impressive than any conference.
Yeah, I think the Pac-12 has taken some dirt on their face the last couple of years. I know SEC Sorts, who I love, those the guys who do those things. They always had them being as like the jokester, the one that people pay no attention to. No, we don't want him riding with us in a car. He sits in the back or throw him into the woods or something like that. So it's their time to get back to respectability. And I think of Bill Walton sitting there probably thinking, oh my God, this is great. Finally, the Pac-12 is back where they belong. So I think that the number of teams and the style of play, Oregon State is a team I love. They play very physical. Oregon, offensively, just lit up. One of the better teams in the Big Ten, Iowa. And the other thing about Iowa is they had played very well defensively the second half of the year, and Oregon just lit them up.
Exactly.
So, and even UCLA, look, a lot of good things have happened to the Pac-12. They've taken this time, they're using it, and good for them.
Exactly, and so we'll now take a look at the entire tournament field, teams that are left, and I'm not going to make you make any predictions, but we won't see you until
crystal ball. Let me see.
We won't see you here until after the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight games are done, but are there any intriguing matchups you see moving forward? Do you see any big-time upsets? We've seen a lot so far. A lot of double-digit seeds are now into this round. Do you see any kind of crazy matchups, and what do you expect maybe this time next week the games will be looking at?
Well, I think in the East, and this is going to upset some people, but I love Florida State. I just think they give Alabama supreme matchup problems. I love them against Michigan. I expect them to get to get to the Final Four. I actually picked them to get to the Final Four. Maybe I lost my my rooting card for Alabama on that one. I don't know.
Well, there's a whole bunch of Auburn fans that will love that pick.
Yeah. Yay, Mark. Okay. Gonzaga, I think they just have an advantage over everybody. I mean, you could put the 96 Bulls against them, and I think they would have a shot. So I think that there's really not that much looking at these teams that I think they could expose and create a tough run for Gonzaga. Although, I will say this, if Alabama can get to the Final Four, I do like them to really push them.
Yeah.
All right? In the South, Arkansas is a team that has underachieved all year, and then they started to get noticed the second half of the year. They've only had like one or two losses, since like the middle of February. They have a lot of seniors. They have Moses Moody,
that's right.
one of the better freshmen in the country. So I think they can be a threat to Baylor. Baylor shoots the ball really well, though.
That's right.
And Arkansas, I don't know if they defend well enough to cause Baylor to be off their game. If Baylor's just missing shots, there's nothing they can do. But Arkansas, I don't think they have the ability to get out there and make them miss shots by the way they defend. So I would say that you probably will not see an upset there. I expect Baylor to get to the Final Four. And here, Houston, I thought, plays great defense, right up there with Alabama, one of the best in the nation. But there's something about Syracuse and the way that they rise to the occasion as a high seed. You have an 11, a 12, and an 8 here. Loyola Chicago is another team that has tournament success when they get there.
That's right.
So I think Houston, my heart's telling me Houston, but the other part of my mind that's logical says I think Syracuse is a team that's going to get to the Final Four.
It'd be really interesting because you mentioned Jim Boeheim's success as a head coach, not only just as a head coach in the tournament just in general, but also especially as a double-digit seed. Here he is once again, and he's got a shot to put the Orange back into the Elite Eight and possibly the Final Four. Meanwhile, according to Bleacher Report, they had their odds out for the national championship, and you see the disparity with the top teams as compared to everybody else. Gonzaga is the overwhelming favorite. They're more of a favorite than just about anybody. And number 2, Baylor, who you mentioned a little bit earlier, you see Alabama hanging on right there with the teams kind of in that second tier with Houston, Michigan, and Arkansas, and then basically everybody else with a south of 5% chance.
Look, I think, we'll go out there and place a little bet on Oral Roberts. What do you got to lose?
I was going to say, you put a $10 bet out. I'm not sure what you'll make back. If you probably pay a hass off.
Just don't get up in your prayer tower and expect the world to end. I think that, too, if you're looking at teams like legit Florida State at 3%, that'd be a pretty good bet.
Right.
I don't know about it. It's just too hard to think Creighton or UCLA or even Syracuse. I don't think Syracuse could win.
I think the stars have to align for a team basically outside of that top 8, outside of the teams in the left-hand column. You got Florida State, who's got a shot. I think, like you said, the way they play, they can body you. They get maybe an injury break or two. I think they have a shot. I think Arkansas has a shot. Michigan, if they catch fire. But I mean, according to not only Bleacher Report, but every sports book just about that runs in the country says that Gonzaga is the overwhelming favorite.
That's really interesting, though. Houston better than Alabama, but Alabama better than Michigan.
That's right.
And then Loyola Chicago better than Florida State. I don't know about that.
Right, and we'll see how it all shakes out because obviously after this set of games, they'll reset the odds after the Sweet 16 games, and then we'll go into the Final Four. So it should be interesting as we head to the Sweet 16 that begins coming up this weekend. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll talk football. Jacksonville State in another game week, and what part of their game is really taking off. We'll discuss it coming up next. We're back here on Overtime on WOTM. I'll tell you what, it's been a great season for Jacksonville State overall. 7-1 just in the overall play. However, they're undefeated right now in the spring. And so they, against overseas opponents, they've had a really strong set of games here. One part of the game that's really been rolling is their running game. We'll take a look at some of the highlights of that running game. They're really doing it through a series of 3 different running backs, but they also have a quarterback that is committing to the run as well, and also being able to have a threat in the run game as well. Uriah West leads the team in rushing, 94 carries for just over 480 yards and 4 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Josh Samuel also has 90-plus carries with over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Pat Jackson has also assumed a major role on this team. The youngster, 67 rushes, 268 yards and a pair of touchdowns. And even Zion Webb, who you see right there on the option play, 32 carries for 167 yards and 1 touchdown. This running game has been really fun to watch. And, you know, if you've watched Jacksonville State over the last few years, they've had a true throwing quarterback in Gerhard Cooper. They've also had guys, if you going back even further, that were more prolific passers of the football than they were rushers. However, right now you have a triple threat in the background, in the backfield. You see in some formations they're all in there at the same time, as well as a quarterback that can run it as well. I think JSU really brings an interesting dynamic to the overall season, just the way they play as compared to everybody else, and the way they play the rest of college football is being played right now with all the spreading out and high tempo and a lot of passing. I'll tell you what, I've been really impressed with this football team. They were ahead for another game this weekend at home, and I kind of expect this trend to continue against Austin Peay.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stands out for me, their running game and just their team speed overall. You can see everywhere, especially on defense, the linebackers, the secondary. These guys are very fast. And when you have team speed, you're able to do a lot of different things that force your opponent outside of what they want to do well. Jack State overall is number 21 in the nation as far as rushing offense. When you can run the ball well, you're going to break the other teams well, like we were talking about with Alabama and defense.
Right.
Offensive linemen love to line up and just beat up the defense. And if they know that they can run the ball and they are forcing their will on these defenders, that is something that they can't wait to do. And that opens up everything else.
Exactly, exactly. It's been a big part of their game plan. We'll take a look at the way they've rushed the ball in the first 4 games in the spring. And you take a look at most teams around the country, and they're airing the ball out 30 times a game. Well, Jacksonville State, they're rushing this thing 40-something to 50-something times per game. You take a look at their production so far. This is against the spring opponents, OVC only so far here, and JSU really, really putting it on the team so far in the OVC.
Yeah, they are number 1 as far as rushing touchdowns with 16.
Exactly. So you have 16 overall. You're taking a look at some of the teams, the games they've played in the spring. You also have to add, when you have the 16, you have to add the games that were in the non-conference part of the season. In the fall, they played 4 non-conference games. They only have 1 loss. That 1 loss is in Tallahassee against Florida State. They have a 3-headed monster, though, at running back. Uriah West, Josh Samuel, and Pat Jackson. And head coach John Gross says it is an embarrassment of riches back there, and they all bring something unique to the table.
I'm glad to have 3 that we can hand it to, and you don't really care which one you hand it to, and you put them all 3 in the game at the same time. So I think that's been a plus for us right now. I think this bunch, passing game-wise, probably the best group we've had overall. I mean, I think they all 3 can catch a ball out of the backfield, and they make explosive plays once they catch the ball, out of the backfield. So they all 3 got good hands, and it's good to throw, fast screens to them and get them out in the perimeter on the flat routes and swing routes and even downfield. So I think that makes them. You got to cover them out of the backfield. So they're a factor in our passing game.
I think we all bring something different to the table, but we all do complement each other. We have a great group of backs. We're not selfish. We put the team first, whoever moment it is like, you never know who it is, but, we do good sharing the load. We're staying healthy, and that's really the main goal is staying healthy and staying fresh. So when the 4th quarter comes, we're still fresh and ready to go.
Jacksonville State and Austin Peay will kick off this Sunday afternoon at Burgess Snowfield. You can catch that game on ESPN+. Our friends Mickey Shadricks and Butch Butler will be on the call for that one. Coming up next, we'll stay in the world of football. The NFL free agency has been hot and heavy. We'll talk about some of the free agent moves so far and what we expect from the teams coming up next here on Overtime. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. We stay in the world of football, but Mark, let's go to the NFL level. Right now we're in the middle of free agency, and unlike other sports, you have the draft first and then you have free agency. Well, the football season is not like that, and the NFL is not like that, and this year is obviously a lot different with the salary cap issues. Yep. Free agency's been hot and heavy, and we've seen different teams make different moves. Think about a guy like J.J. Watt is on the move, a guy like Carson Wentz signing with a new football team. So far, what are your thoughts on free agency and some of the big moves we've seen so far throughout the offseason here in March?
Well, I think the Colts getting Wentz is something that intrigues me because the Colts are a very good football team. Mm-hmm. You saw how good they did with Phillip Rivers. But again, there was something Rivers just lacked at big times. Nothing against him. Maybe now he's a little older, so a little easier to diagnose. But I think Carson Wentz is a guy that has something to prove. He feels like he didn't get the shot he deserved in Philadelphia, then had his job taken away from him. J.J. Watt, another guy who is a veteran now. He wants to win. Okay, the time has come now for him to win before his career is over. Move I love, the best move that goes under the radar is the Cardinals getting Rodney Hudson, a center, a guy I've tried as a writer to try and maybe get somebody on the Jets to pay attention to this guy. This guy is the best center in the game. He doesn't allow any pressures, only allowed 1 sack last year. Very good running the ball, but the number one thing he's going to be able to do is he's going to be able to take Kyler Murray and that young Arizona team, which you saw at times last year.
Right.
These guys can play. And they have great comeback ability. They got great athletes. I think Kyler Murray is one of the up-and-coming quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, maybe a young version of Russell Wilson, can get to that next level with a guy like Rodney Hudson there to be in the huddle, calm everybody down, and really set the tone.
Exactly, and that's another great one. There have been, of course, many moves. We can't talk about all of them, but we'll give you some of the notable moves. You talked about J.J. Watt just a bit ago, going to the Arizona Cardinals. I think it's a great move for him. He said lifestyle was a big part of the reason why he ended up making that move over to Arizona, but they also have a great offense, and they needed a pass rusher, so he kind of fills that gap there. Take a look at some of the other moves around the league. You look at a guy like Emmanuel Sanders. He's a nice weapon that Josh Allen will now have. He's on a 1-year deal. Meanwhile, Andy Dalton, the Bears, really kind of flirted with the idea of maybe getting Russell Wilson.
They wanted him bad.
And they wanted Russell Wilson really badly, and they land on Andy Dalton. I don't know how much that kind of makes your fan base really excited. But of these moves, we'll look at a few others. Of these moves and others, what were some of your thoughts about not only what the teams did, but what they were able to, as far as do, is helping out their needs?
I think Chicago threw in Wrigley Field and Bill Murray, too, and they just decided they didn't want it. I mean, could you offer them more? No, and they didn't.
Right.
So they made the effort to try and get Russell Wilson. I think that when you look at something like, I only believe that free agency can help you so much. You need to be able to draft a good free agency, fills in holes, and you don't want to spend too much money. You want to spend it on the guys that are maybe coming off their rookie contract.
Right.
And hadn't gotten consistent playing time, so you're not overspending for a free agent that's going to destroy your salary cap. A lot of these guys fit into that, and if you look at the next group that we show here, these are guys too, that you're not really breaking the bank for these guys, but you're filling a need, and you have a guy that knows the NFL, has been there, and is now going to get the chance to prove that. The Patriots probably are a team that I think most people would say has benefited from that the most. But that's totally opposite of what the Belichick way has been known to do.
Exactly, and I think that you bring up a good point there with New England. Also, with the New York teams, you have the Giants who are really doing a pretty good job, I think, of surrounding their quarterback, Daniel Jones, with some talent, getting Kenny Galladay on a big deal, 4 years, $72 million. Meanwhile, Auburn fans are very, very familiar with the New York Jets acquisition.
I like him.
Carl Lawson, 3 years, $45 million. I think that was a good play. Also, Alabama fans are very familiar with who the Vikings got. Dalvin Tomlinson played for Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. He's at 2 years, $21 million. Meanwhile, the Saints finding their backup after Drew Brees announced his retirement, quickly re-signing Jameis Winston to a deal that is team-friendly and also based in with a lot of incentives where Jameis can make a lot of money now, going as what we would presume as to be the starter over in New Orleans. And then the Patriots, they spent a lot of money, kind of the key top addition, Matt Judon, 4 years, $54.5 million. But it was a spending spree. I think of that gif of Leonardo DiCaprio just throwing money everywhere. $148.6 million in guaranteed money in the very first week of free agency. Also, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defending Super Bowl champions, found a way to make it work with some of their free agents, most recently Ndamukong Suh signing as well. I think you nailed it as far as teams needing to draft and develop well. That's the bread and butter so far of the NFL when it comes to free agency. But I think a lot of teams did fill a lot of needs. You know, it would really be interesting to see as it relates to the salary cap coming into next year.
Well, look, I think a perfect example of a guy not getting his opportunity and then turning into a star was James Farrior. Mm-hmm. The Jets drafted him number 7 overall in 1997, the year that Manning chose. Because they had the number 1 pick, but Manning chose to stay in school. Farrior then goes to the Steelers after his rookie contract is over, wins an NFL defensive MVP.
Exactly.
So those are the types of players you look to have impact and change and build upon what you already have.
Coming up next here on Overtime, we'll flip it up just a little bit. We'll have a poll as it relates to sports in the COVID world. It's really interesting. We'll also talk baseball and softball. Be sure to join us. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, we're going to talk something a little bit different here, kind of sports in the COVID world. And one of the things that has come out here recently has been a bunch of reports talking to sports fans about the way that they feel about coming back into the sports world in a somewhat typical environment. And the research shows that the majority of fans are ready to come back and come back immediately to the way the sports that they've known and loved have been over the last few years.
Well, I think everybody feels the same way, that enough is enough. Let's at least try and get back to normality. Let's try and get back to going to games. We don't have to be at full capacity, but let's be a little bit more than 10%.
Right.
Okay, use common sense, be able to keep those who are susceptible, make sure that they've gotten the vaccine, and if they haven't gotten the vaccine, then don't come to the game.
Right.
But for those who are young, who are healthy, who've had the vaccine or had the virus and want to get out there and enjoy and root for their team, that's a big thing. I really missed hearing fans cheer after somebody scores, or even for the NHL or NBA, being able to play off that home crowd advantage. So in one aspect you have, well, maybe the better team will win since there's no advantage either way, but I'm sick of it. I really am. And the other thing is misinformation. Where do you go to get the truth?
Right.
Nobody knows. I'm so sick of all this over-politicized environment where everybody makes big deals about this or that. We're all American people. We all have the same needs. We all have the same desires. We all want to be able to provide for our family and be happy and be willing to lead a life that God has prepared for us and has created us to live. No more being forced to do things that we're not allowed. No more having to come up with different ways to provide for our family and to live the American dream. It's over. Now we got to get back to reality.
Exactly. According to that poll, more than half say they plan to return to stadiums immediately. 32% also want that, and then 56% say they want some social distancing measures in place, but they will want to go back to stadiums immediately.
Common sense.
So we'll see how that all goes. Meanwhile, they have limited fans in baseball and softball stadiums in and around the state. We'll take a look at the baseball scene in and around Alabama. Alabama's still a top 25 team, suffered a couple of losses against the number 1 team in the country in Arkansas. Meanwhile, Auburn with 11 wins on the season. Everybody else hovering right around 500 and a little bit below. And I think it's been a really interesting year for the Crimson Tide. They lost last night by 1 run to Southern Miss, and head coach Brad Bohannon knows they got to turn this thing around quickly. They have number 4 Ole Miss coming to Tuscaloosa coming up this weekend.
We just got to get better. We got to get better in a hurry. And so I told the kids after the game, we got to play better in a hurry because it's not going to get any easier. Southern Miss, very nice club, another top 5 team opponent this weekend. And we face Gunnar Hoagland on Thursday, who's one of the best pitchers in the country. So, we got to keep working, keep competing, and we got to get better offensively as soon as possible.
Meanwhile, for softball around the state, Alabama still holds a top 5 spot, only 2 losses on the year. Auburn, meanwhile, 18-6. They still rank in the top 25. Troy's having a phenomenal season, already 22 wins. And you see how UAB, Sanford, and JSU are doing as we sit midway through the season, and teams are still getting into conference play. Well, coming up in our final segment here on Overtime, the world of Hollywood and sports, no strangers to one another. They're reuniting once again. We'll tell you how coming up next. Final segment here on WOTM. I thought we'd have a little fun thing. Hollywood and sports are always been very, very, very close. They will be once again. The word out today that Martin Scorsese, one of the best directors and one of the best filmmakers ever, is teaming up with Jamie Foxx to make a limited series about none other than Iron Mike Tyson. He will play Mike Tyson in an upcoming series. Which thoughts on that?
Iron Mike. You really play Ray Charles and Iron Mike. A little bit of a stretch there.
Right.
But look, I love Jamie Foxx, great actor. And Tyson, being from the Adirondacks, New York, think of Mike Tyson Punch-Out, NES.
Right. Exactly. Antoine Fuqua is selected to direct that film. So Martin Scorsese, Mike Tyson, and how about Jamie Foxx? I think this will be really, really interesting. No word yet on when this will be released, but it will be a limited span. And get this, Jamie Foxx will actually play a young Tyson as well. So he's already getting his body into shape to look like the way Tyson did when he won the championship back in his early 20s. And so it'll be really interesting. And the very, very talented Jamie Foxx will reprise that role. And I think that will be interesting for all involved.
One of the best actors we got
in sports.
Yep.
Well, that is our time here in Overtime, and that is our week this week. Special thanks to both Mark and John for joining us. We'll see you back here coming up on Monday night.